So why now? I guess a lot of it is in Dario's presentation and numbers, really, in the sense that the industry's been through this huge investment cycle. We've got fibre everywhere, we've got 5G most places, not everywhere, but it's getting better.
What flavour of 5G though?
Well, and it gets to that, but it's getting better, and so we got to a point where the network infrastructure assets good enough to at least apply this principle a bit more widely, probably. And so I think that's where it matches quite well. I think he said at one point, and I fully agree with him. Telecom's kind of a momentum business.
Right.
And other analysts use this term called slowly then suddenly.
Okay.
Where things kind of build, they look like they're taking
sort of position.
It's a pain in the It's really hard work. You're grinding it. It never works. But once the conditions are in place, that's when you sort of get that, the multiplier. And that's what we're
Cambrian explosion. Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Telecoms.com podcast, recorded live, technically. I mean, you won't be seeing this for days, but it's recorded live on the show floor at Network X 2024. And I'm delighted to be joined by podcast debutante, Teresa Krasova. What's it? Krasova. That's as good as you're going to get from me. Who works with regular co-host Ian Morris at Light Reading. Welcome, Teresa. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And returning guest, Gabriel. I was going to call you Clark. Gabriel Brown from Heavy Reading. So I got both the readings on this one. And you're an analyst, I should stress, whereas Teresa's a journalist, and I'm just me. We're just going to talk mainly about the morning keynotes that we all sat in on various tranches of, and I wrote up. So I'll queue it up, and then I'll ask you first, Teresa, what you thought. It's basically themed around network APIs, which perhaps conveniently, perhaps not, is also what we banged on about in the most recent podcast before this one with James Crawshaw. And the purpose of network APIs, for people who didn't listen to that or just perhaps got sent to sleep by it, is to open up the network, the thing called network exposure. Open up a network so that other people can innovate clever things over the top of it. It's quite an abstract thing, something I still struggle to fully sort of conceptualize in my mind. But right now the network's almost entirely controlled by operators. And they're saying if those operators can find a way in a secure, manageable way of opening it up to third-party developers and all that sort of thing, then they can do clever things, perhaps a bit like companies like Uber did when mobile broadband was first invented and all that sort of thing. So that was the main theme of it. And I'll stop there, but I've got a few bits of commentary about some of the discussions that happen. But I'll just say, so Teresa, to you, what did you get from all that? Are you getting your head around all this API stuff?
Yeah, to an extent, as everyone, I think. But I thought there was kind of an interesting, almost contrast between Dario Tolmesio, who had the keynote.
So he opened it up, another colleague of ours.
Yeah, who kind of opened it up with kind of like presenting a kind of positive picture about the industry, I think, saying, there has been decline growth, and he mentioned APIs, I think, is one of the kind of positive developments in the industry. And then you had someone from Deutsche Telekom, Peter Arbiter, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and he was like, yes, it's a positive story, but also it's taking us 8 years from kind of first starting to implement these to actually kind of getting them in place and starting to monetize them. So, but yeah, everyone seemed really upbeat about where APIs are right now, and they seem quite optimistic, I thought. No?
Yeah, well, no, some of them are. I mean, I'll get back to it. I thought there was an interesting bit on a panel, which I think you had another appointment, so you weren't able to listen, but there was one of the chief strategy, I can't remember her precise job title. I've got it in my story here, actually. MD of Research and Network Strategy at BT Group, and she's called Gabriela Schioman. Yeah, far too. Ian's always much better at the surnames than I am. And she was slightly pouring a bit of water on it. She wasn't being downbeat, but she was being a bit of a let's hold our horses and not get too carried away. So that was an interesting dynamic there.
It was also quite interesting. It was in the beginning, I think it was Dario who was kind of asking for the opinion of everyone in the room It looked
Yeah.
like the kind of agreement was that it's going to be more of an incremental growth than a massive surge in.
Yeah, and he was generally, I mean, we spoke to him immediately beforehand, him being a colleague of ours, and he was saying that he's trying, he's trying to put a bit more of a positive spin on it this year versus last year, where I think he was a bit more, perhaps he feels in hindsight, overly realistic. But there is something to be said for glass half full, glass half empty, bullish, bearish, all that sort of thing. And yeah, he definitely points to some indicators, which were reasons to be positive. So fair play to him on that. So did you, were you there from the start? Okay. Did you hear Dario's pitch and all that?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I think we're going to manifest the industry we want, right? Have you heard of that?
Manifesting, which is like willing it, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's, be the change you want to see, or was that
Right.
Michelle Obama or someone?
Be the change you want to see.
Anyway, I think you've got to kind of have some if you talk your story down all the time, it's going to get hard work.
How can you expect anyone to jump on board?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I thought to put the two together, I mean, the network APIs, if we can put it that way, I don't fully get it, although I did bump into it in the coffee queue. A guy from Deutsche Telekom said he was one of the original developers of the code for camera, and he was
Right.
He's been working on it for years, and he was really happy with everything.
That things are finally moving on.
Yeah.
But that still does sort of point out what Teresa said, that this has been a slow burner for a while, but maybe it's accelerating.
But that's, I think, a good link to Dario's presentation, really. It's kind of why is now a good time, because it has been around for a long time. It's not a new concept, it's not even a new product, really. Operators want to get into this, we can call it platform business, in a similar way to, I guess the closest analogy will be public cloud companies, where customers can come and control the infrastructure and services to meet their need, and it's all automated, so it doesn't cost the cloud company, great margins essentially. And they want to get some of that into networking. So why now? I guess a lot of it is in Dario's presentation and numbers, really, in the sense that the industry's been through this huge investment cycle. We've got fiber everywhere, we've got 5G most places, not everywhere, but it's getting better.
What flavour of 5G though?
Well, and it gets to that, but it's getting better, and so we got to a point where the network infrastructure assets good enough to at least apply this principle a bit more widely, probably. And so I think that's where it matches quite well. I think he said at one point, and I fully agree with him. Telecom's kind of a momentum business.
Right.
And other analysts use this term called slowly then suddenly.
Okay.
Where things kind of build, it looks like they're taking
sort of position.
It's a pain in the It's really hard work. You're grinding it. It never works. But once the conditions are in place, that's when you sort of get the multiplier. And that's what we're
Cambrian explosion.
That kind of thing. That's what we're hoping for, right? And so it feels like it's too early to say we're going to really hit growth speed. But we kind of feel a bit better about it, I think, than last year.
It does. I mean, that has been sort of persistent messaging. Actually, Peter Arbiter, who was one of the people that up on stage, was also one of the people I interviewed when they announced this joint venture a few weeks ago, where basically Ericsson is contributing Vonage, or at least certainly big chunks of it, and then quite an impressive roster of global big telcos have all signed up to this new joint venture, which on one level is a sort of aggregator of aggregators. It's basically one of the biggest hurdles they get with making this API model take off is a developer doesn't want to have to deal with different paradigms, different commercial relationships, different code bases with different networks. They basically want to have one API, which stands for Application Programming Interface, I think, and they want to code for that, and for that to work on all operators all over the world. So I think, unless either of you two have interpreted it differently, that was one of the main purposes of this joint venture. And Peter, together with a guy whose name I butchered on the pod before, and I'm not going to try and pronounce again, but he's from Ericsson, were the two people I interviewed then. And one of the big things they were stressing is that this does require a lot of patience. Rome wasn't built in a day, and all that sort of thing, which I'm sympathetic towards, but then patience is always finite. And one data point that Dario came up with, while being upbeat, was that Omdia, which is the analyst house that he works for, forecasts that the total global revenues from this API opportunity are going to be $9 billion by 2029. So that's 5 years away, and that's $9 billion distributed among all the world's operators. So that slightly tempers it, and I guess just
So it's less than 1% of the industry
right.
service revenue.
Yeah. So what, Gay? What do you think of that? Do you think does that sort of slightly perturb you that even in 5 years' time, our colleagues are projecting just 1% of total service revenues from this opportunity?
I mean, there's a lot of forecasts, and the analyst and consulting business in general has got, and not just them, vendors, operators, everybody in the industry has got a pretty bad record of over forecasting the hype buzz thing and not being kind of realistic. So at that level, I think it's actually quite good to see they've tried to keep it bounded somehow to some notion of reality. I mean, there's some pretty absurd numbers flying around as well. So I think the other point now is, well, it's not that far away, 5 years. But it's not, I think Gabriella from BTG.
We'll just call her Gabriella.
So she made the point in her comments on the panel that that's not really the opportunity, monetizing APIs directly. That isn't, that's kind of neither here nor there, and less than 1% of revenue kind of shows that, right? So it's more about, is that a better way to enable some services that are way more useful to customers and therefore better revenue for operators? I think that's the bigger thing really is like, well, what are these services going to be that use these, why are they going to be better services?
Indeed.
How are they going to actually...
And until the proverbial killer app presents itself, it can be hard to visualize, to conceptualize this stuff. And we're still very much at the stage of just talking about creating an innovation platform on which something, and we haven't got a fucking clue what it's going to be, will then be innovated on top of.
Yeah.
So on that on that conceptual side, so how long have you been in light reading now?
A year and a half.
A bit over a year and a half. And were you writing or had any particular interest in telecoms prior to that?
More of a tangential one.
More of a tangential.
We're looking at things like smart cities.
Smart. Okay, so you were in the tech space a bit.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is because we've got Gabriel. You've been covering telecoms how long? Or does it longer than you care to admit?
I think it is about 25 years.
25 years. So we've got 25 years of you, 10 years with me, year and a half with you. We've got a sort of spectrum of how much exposure we've had to the industry. And I wonder, from your point of view, how good a job you think the industry is doing of describing to you what the point of this network exposure, network API thing is.
Yeah, well, I think from my point of view, one of the really interesting things is just that I think when I first started listening to hearing about APIs, it was kind of billed as like part of this big answer to the monetization issue.
Yeah.
And where kind of telcos have obviously invested a lot in their 5G networks and haven't necessarily haven't seen a lot of money come back from that investment. And I always kind of, so in my mind, I kind of conceptualized it initially as, okay, so they are doing this kind of help address that, but it kind of looks like, from what you're saying, that it's never really been it was never going to be a big answer to that. So I think it's just, for me, I've been a tiny bit confused about what the big aim is with network APIs.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of get, obviously there's a huge benefit in improving service to customers and combating fraud, that sort of a thing. But I don't know if you agree with me or if it's just my kind of maybe understanding it kind of badly in the beginning. But I feel like it's mainly the messaging has been maybe a little bit.
No, I personally totally agree with you. I mean, that was part of the reason why I queued up the question. It'd been a bit cruel if after all that I'd have gone, no, I've totally got my head around it. I don't know what's wrong with you. No, I completely agree. And it's something I'm wrestling with because it's our day job. And so it's our job to try and understand this stuff. but sometimes it just doesn't land in a simple way. I mean, I think the panel at the end, which I was able to stay around for and wrote up. Often at events like this, the panels are the most illustrative because you get a little bit of toing and froing, and people can't just stick to their PowerPoint that they came in with. And on this one, we had Peter Arbiter there, and we're just going to say Gabriella from BT because I'm not very good at surnames. And then I should mention there was also a third panelist called Ottilia Anton, who is the telco APIs person at Orange. But a lot of the toing and froing was between Peter and Gabriella, where Peter, I think he'd admit it if he was here, is pretty much a cheerleader for this new initiative and this JV. Like I said, he was on the call together with Ericsson when they were announcing it. Whereas Gabriella, she's not down on it, but she's more of a realist, and she's more just like, well, hold on, this isn't a panacea. This doesn't solve everything. And I thought I've got a couple of quotes that I put in my piece that I wrote this morning, which sort of summarise some of the stuff I took from her. She said, this quote from Gabriella, APIs are a means... Oh no, actually the first quote was, and this is kind of what Gabe was just saying earlier, are telcos just the enablers of service information, or do they participate in it? So what that point was is, I think we can all understand, at least to some extent, that this API opportunity is supposed to create a new platform for innovation on top of the network, and operators can enable it. But her point, and her second point of her quote about, or do they participate in the innovation, is kind of a callback to the advent of mobile broadband. When you were still at school, sorry. And we had 3G come along, and then 4G was mobile broadband done properly, and nearly all of the profit and revenue and value extracted from it was not by operators, it was by what they used to call OTTs, over-the-top players. We think of it as like big tech internet players, the likes of Google, and then specific apps like Uber is often cited as a quintessential example. And she's sort of going, she didn't say explicitly, but she's saying, do we want a repeat of that? Are we just going to create an opportunity for all these other third parties to make all the money? What did you think of that as a sort of like a little wake-up call?
I think you're sort of paraphrasing a bit, and that's
very much so.
That's generally the simplest level of positioning it all in the industry, and that is kind of the general view, right? Yeah. So I'm not.
Don't worry, I wasn't really butthurt.
If the whole point of a platform business, if that's what they're trying to be, is you encourage and allow users of your platform to make money and be successful themselves.
Yeah.
That's why cloud companies are so successful, because all their customers are using it to make themselves successful.
Yeah.
So I think operators
and the rising tide lifts all boats and all that.
Yeah, operators, I think they've now realised they shot themselves in the foot by thinking, hey, that money you're making, I should be making.
Yeah.
Which that's not right.
It's not how it works.
Yeah, and so they finally kind of caught up with reality of things.
Yeah, they're still trying the old fair contributions thing, which is one manifestation.
That's another example.
Yeah.
So I think there's that side of it. You want to be a platform business, you have to be an enabler, but you have to let other people make money. I mean, that's what's going to, what they call it, the marketing buzzword is you've got to have a flywheel, right?
Right.
Interest and revenue. And people are only going to do that if they're successful. If every time you get successful, you steal the idea and the revenue,
it's not going to work.
Which is what's happening in the internet platforms, really, isn't it, at the moment? They're kind of... It's just a massive divergence. But
no, go for it. We like tangents on Telecoms.com.
Massive tangent, this. But have you heard of this term, the enshittification of the internet?
Yeah. I actually spoke about it on a pod once.
Right, so...
I love the term.
Yeah, it's a good term, right? Yeah. It is capturing what's happening in all these online consumer platforms where they're kind of ruining it for the customers.
Yeah.
Telco's already been through that. And they
Why don't you quickly summarise, as we've done this tangent, what your understanding of enshittification is? It was coined by a specific individual, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. He's a very well-known sort of...
I've forgotten his name. He's a well-known tech commentator.
Tech commentator type. Is it Galloway or someone like that? Scott Galloway or
I can't remember now.
one of them.
Yeah, I think it was a Scot.
Something.
Sadly, not me.
Yeah.
What's your understanding of it as a concept, like in a nutshell?
Well, there's two ways of answering this. I think
Okay.
one is a lot of the web internet experience that we all have is getting shit. I mean, there's adverts, there's annoyances,
Very
there's,
spammy.
It's spammy, that's stealing our data, there's privacy intrusion.
Facebook, for example, seems to be getting increasingly desperate to get me engaged. It's just flagging up random things,
Yeah.
going, look at this. Look, Scott, I get several of those a day.
And even where you are engaged, they're just feeding shit crap into your life, into your eyeballs. So
Cory Doctorow.
Cory Doctorow, that's it.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Pierre.
So I think at the base level, it's that, isn't it? Like, there's a lot of shit coming our way.
Yeah.
And, so then they sort of build on it and make a little bit more of a theory, if you like, which is that, well, this is because these platforms are maxed out. So first they attracted the users in, the users worked, they loved it because they could see what their friends were doing, and then they loved it because their grandma could see what the
Yeah.
grandkids were doing. So then they got the advertisers who loved it because they could target, particular.
The audience. Yeah.
And then they started, screwing the advertisers.
Exactly.
And
Those
so
are the
on,
three
so
phases
on
I
and so
understand.
forth.
So you have the initial phase where you're just about scale and audience growth. Then you're about exploiting the audience, let's call it what it is. And then you're about exploiting the people that you brought in to exploit the audience. So that's where the inshitification. And then the end result is that you get a company just so obsessed with growing revenue streams and that sort of thing that the user experience goes down the toilet.
Yeah,
So as an opposite.
and if I
part of that.
could bring this all the way back to
Yeah.
telecom, I think one of the things we have at the moment is we had explosion in broadband, there can be an explosion in apps and things, and they took all the money, fair enough. But we've now reached a point where I think the quality of services and applications has kind of plateaued. They're kind of designing them for best effort broadband. They're actually not very good, and so in a way, the networks are sort of at the point where we need better apps, we need better experiences.
Yeah.
And we're stuck with a decade-old concept really around apps and services. And honestly, I think it's all these app developers and platforms are kind of behind what we need and want. And,
Right.
and turning out crap, basically. And so I think there's a lot of scope for much better performing apps and experiences. And I think some of that is through delivering that on the network, and so it's not going to be it's going to take time, of course, but what we've got is too much junk, and there's definitely scope for better quality, better experiences, and better care of us as customers and users. So
Yeah, I hear you.
I fear that's a tangent, but
No, it's relevant tangent, and like I said, we embrace tangents. Our podcast would be a lot shorter if it wasn't for them, that's for sure. And Pierre's the first to applaud our regular 2-hour one, which won't be the case this time, right? Just to reassure everyone. And maybe, again, it's such a hackneyed and reductive and unhelpful term, but I'm going to use it anyway. The killer app. Maybe at some stage in the future, perhaps within the next 5 years, some killer app will come along for this new opportunity. As you say, a sort of new, refreshed, kind of uninshitified app.
a really simple example of this is, when you go to pay quite often and it's touch pay and their little machine doesn't work.
Yeah.
And they're just like, bloody hell, the thing's not working, the connectivity's no good. Well, that machine could be through an API calling up a network service that gives it priority. And that's actually one of the examples of 5G network slicing that's being introduced.
Yeah.
Now, it's a small example. It just means millions and millions of people doing things every day would get, they'd save a couple seconds. And the shopkeeper would save minutes, hours all the time.
Yeah.
So we put up with that, and it's rubbish, right? But it doesn't have to be, and that's the example that's actually getting solved, I think, with these technologies. But that's a small transaction, but there's many things like that.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
no, you didn't interrupt at all, and that's also encouraged. I mean, you've been on our podcast. Once we get about 2 hours in and we've had a few beers, the interrupting comes thick and fast.
But we should say there's literally no beers.
No beers.
And we're right in the middle of a
Because this
cafe
is-
on an exhibition show.
Because this is lunchtime and I've got to record a bunch of videos in the afternoon, so I can't be drinking beers. Otherwise, I would. So, Teresa, any other little thoughts from today, any other thoughts on I don't know, what this opportunity, how it manifests itself to you, how you think it might look, how you're going to write it up?
Why are you reading my mind, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, blimey, when you would say this, do you mean...
Yeah, I mean, just like the network API thing, unless there's, I mean, you sat in on one or two other sessions from the keynotes. If you think we've exhausted what we can talk about with that, was there anything else you took from all the keynotes that you attended today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think with the network APIs, like what I thought was kind of interesting was that there was one concrete example from Deutsche Telekom, which was the partnership with Rewe, where at the supermarket where we're kind of talking about
That's right.
how you could possibly use APIs kind of better gauge customer behavior patterns as they are shopping, as opposed to kind of just getting, them scan the kind of membership card, whatever, if they do at the end of the
That was a good example, because to this enshittification theme, he said this app, they want to do this app free. He remember that he saw that they've already got 120 apps on my phone, so they want to, people don't want more of that. And that your example there of the retailer could do some. I found it a bit creepy, to be honest.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to ask Teresa first, but seeing as you brought it up, just whether you got any thoughts on privacy with this stuff. As we get more and more of these things where you walk into a shop and someone goes, that's Teresa, and she likes this, that, and the other, and she doesn't like this, that, and the other, and suddenly they know you as well as you know yourself.
And there's already like a creepy amount of information that supermarkets can get from this stuff. Like, I once read somewhere that basically, if you have like a club card or something, they can, for example, tell by the shopping patterns when the woman is pregnant.
Yes, I heard about that, and that's properly creepy, isn't it?
Yeah, and then they will kind of, and then they'll be really sneaky, and they will kind of, make an offer. Well, will be loads of stuff that they know is probably irrelevant, but they will sneak in things just to not appear creepy. But I feel like, to your point, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but I feel like, as you say, like, it's kind of already going that way with Amazon.
It is a bit, well, I was just going to say, I mean, the amount of times my wife goes, I've just been served up a product that's analogous to something we were just chatting about. And so this thing about your phone constantly listening to you, well, that's pretty fucking creepy, isn't it?
Like, I don't necessarily feel 100% comfortable with it. It is kind of, I guess, from my point of view, it kind of stresses the need for, like, regulation of what is done with this data. Because if they anonymize it and use it to kind of, as a supermarket chain, and use it to kind of gauge, 20 people have picked up this can of soup and decided not to buy it, probably it's too expensive for what it is, then it's kind of helpful. That kind of moves things forward. But if they use it to kind of look at, there's Scott, there's Gabe, and, they bought this, and this.
You just need to look at me to see that I'm pregnant. Yes, I totally hear you. Do you share Terry's concerns about this creepy aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, what we're in a situation where, to some extent, regulation can help, but it can also hinder. These companies, they love regulation, don't they? Because that just
raises the barrier to entry.
I suppose they know who's picked up the can of soup 20 times. In a way, that's their data, not your data. So what say have you really got?
Are you talking about things like Amazon Go or whatever?
Yeah, all these kinds of things. I mean, I think the only thing you can do is to somehow try and opt out of it and go to different shops. I don't really go to Amazon anymore because it's so shit. The quality of the adverts and the reviews and the products are never what they say, and it's just like, it's a bad shop,
I think it's good if you know fairly precisely what you're looking for, and then you just buy it. Like I use it a lot for like real commodities like USB-C cables or whatever, and you'll get a half decent one. It'll be some Chinese brand you've never heard of, but it'll normally be a decent quality and quite cheap and out the door sharpish. But I imagine the further up you go in the value chain, the shitter the experience on Amazon.
Yeah, even things like USB cables, if you know the good brand to look for, but they're turning out some crap.
Yeah.
And it's all paid promotion, and they make it as confusing as possible for people. There's a whole, what you heard of this theme, dark patterns?
I haven't heard that.
So it's a big thing in internet that all these platforms use, dark patterns, to basically I mean, there's no doubt a better definition. Pierre can maybe look it up for us, but it kind of basically to confuse you, make you buy the thing that the advertiser paid for, or the thing that's a little bit more expensive, or basically.
Is this like that? If you like that, then you're like this, but taken to another level.
Essentially, it's exploitative. It's, because they know this about you. That there's a bit more to it than that. But
Okay.
But they're running these sort of tests and things on you. All right, so they're right, but it's kind of they're working out where do they put the soup and they sell more, or what type of USB cable. It might even be Chinese, but we call it Chinese. People think it's cheap, so
Right.
And there's all this going on. So it's very. To us, we don't have. I don't know. It doesn't feel very trustworthy.
No, I'm with you.
And I think that's overall bad for society and business.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily. I mean, I also don't really shop on Amazon if I can avoid it, but I'm always a bit overwhelmed by the amount of choice. And I don't feel like the curation there is very good. Like you don't know
Filters or any of
No,
that.
it's just you have 20 sort of semi-identical products. Which one of them is better?
But it's not that they can't do curation. It's that that's what they've chosen to show you,
Yeah.
which is a load of shite.
There is. I mean, I suppose not that Amazon needs anyone to defend it, but I would say that at least they label the stuff that comes up at the top of your search when it is sponsored. At least you can see that it is sponsored.
Yeah.
They're not the only ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I love eBay.
Pierre loves Amazon. I'll tell you, I've got another one on that tangent, which ties in with enchitification, was my experience with Booking.com this summer. So as regular listeners of the pod will know, we went driving around France, staying in a couple of few self-catering places. And it was absolutely lovely, and France is obviously great. Would say that, so we're here now. But the first place we went to, the owners had put somewhere in tiny small print that I didn't see before I got there, that you've got to give them a €500 cash deposit when you arrive. And they also, at the same time, were upselling the cleaning of the flat. They said, do you want to pay for us to clean the flat at the end? And I always thought flat cleaning was just baked into the core price. So my point is, and then I had to go off and get all this money out, which would have cost me on the exchange rate, and I wasn't expecting it. And then they did eventually give it back in full, but then I had to find a way of blowing that cash, which I'm sad to say I did effortlessly. But the point is, Booking.com didn't protect me at all. It basically allowed these people to throw all these arbitrary T's and C's in and these onerous conditions. And I think that's another example maybe of enchitification, where if Booking.com really cared about the end user, which should be the consumer of the thing, not the seller of the accommodation, then it would have taken better care of me there. So there's another one.
I think it's a risk with like the whole platform business, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
it's the responsibility of the platform. Is it kind of
Where it's priority.
the third part? It's just the kind of person in the middle where it's down to the consumer to decide whether something on the platform is good or not. Or should the platform be kind of be able to say, okay, everything that you can find here is will meet a basic standard of service.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a super big issue in general in online business, isn't it? Like the other good example is, these food delivery platforms, where they sort of say, well, we're not really delivering your food, we're providing a service to someone who delivers food.
Yes.
And they want to wash their hands of the responsibility, but take on the profit essentially. So it's obviously that's what businesses want to invest for themselves, but it all gets a bit like.
But when they turn up late or with the wrong stuff, your avenues to then rectify the situation, suddenly the ways in which you can interact with the app again dry up.
Yeah. More dark patterns.
There we go. So, bring it back from that tangent to other stuff that Gabriella spoke about that I quoted in my story. So there was this. I think you might have observed it too, Gabe. You sense there was a slight little bit of friction between her and Peter, only in so much as he was more of a cheerleader and she was a bit more, well, hold on a sec. And so she made that point about whether they're just enablers or whether they're actually directly involved in the innovation. I think your point was very well made, Gabe, that if they want to be innovators as well, they've got to be, to some extent, that could be contradictory with their role as enablers. Sometimes you've got to be one or the other. And then, And anyway, and so I wanted to push back a little bit this, but Gabriella wasn't. She was still well up for it. She went, APIs are a means to an end. We're more focused on what meaning BT, are more focused on what their impact is on the platform play, use cases, and making the network much more attractive to our users. And then this third panelist, Ottilia Anton from Orange. Thank you, Ottilia, for having a pronounceable surname. It's much appreciated. And she said, telcos don't really understand. Telcos don't really understand our customers' customers is nothing new. So that's a slightly different branch of this whole thing of, I suppose, B2B to C or whatever. Like, if they want to do a B2B play, then they've got to understand those businesses' customers to really understand what pain points, to use another slightly cliched term, but just to understand what needs those B2B customers have. They've got to perhaps understand one stage further and see who they're catering to. Does that resonate with you, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said, I think maybe frostiness is too strong of a term, but there was definitely a bit of a kind of, how to put it, slightly different way of looking at the issue between them. And I mean, I think
opinion was divided.
I don't think it was divided. I think it's essentially the same opinion, more or less. But I think one of the points was the BT's and in the UK, and she actually made the point, because there's a big, e-finance and online financial services in the UK, big sector, and it's, modernised well in that sense. They're already doing a lot of these personal identity checks and other financial fraud checks through network APIs into telcos. They're already doing a bunch of this, and then they've got this new group coming along saying, "Hey, look at this great thing."
Yeah, but they're kind of already doing it.
She's like,
how is this so much better?
She's like, "Well, we're already doing this." I think that was a little bit her point, and it's good, but you need more.
Yeah. Cool.
I think that was the essence of the sort of bristliness.
And I thought it was really good. I mean, you've got to have people disagreeing with each other. If all you get is a panel of people all singing from the same hymn sheet, then it just looks totally rehearsed and premeditated and scripted. So that's no good at all. So you need a little bit of that. Whether Peter agrees is another matter.
Digital identity and payment APIs.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's something I got from it. About half of the perceived opportunity is in digital identity and then also fraud prevention. But I think those two bits of the Venn diagram overlap, obviously.
I think they're a little bit the easier ones to do.
Right.
They're not going to
lower hanging fruit.
They're not going to change the operator's financials in any way, I don't think.
Right.
I mean,
so there we are.
Yeah.
So again, that's just a sort of thin end of the wedge, and then let's see what happens down the line.
But you've got to start. So
you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I know you've got all sorts of very important analyst stuff to go off to, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. But we were chatting before we started recording one of the panels you're going to do at the show. Mm-hmm. And I just, if you could quickly tell us what that's about, because I think that might give us a little bit of stuff to conclude by chatting about.
Well, on the third day of the show, morning, on the keynote stage, I am moderating a panel, yes.
Nice one. I won't be here to write it up, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you're going to be gone already.
Yeah, I'll be on my way back. It's my birthday that day as well.
Oh, is it? Cool.
I'm celebrating my birthday on Eurostar.
One thing I've learned in 25 years of going to these sorts of things is the first morning is the scripted part where, like, you don't, it's not till later on where everyone's a bit more relaxed.
Right.
That you learn
a bit of a natter.
You learn the big things,
Okay.
But anyway,
that's your way of saying that you've got the prime slot on Thursday morning.
It's going to be about what should the next G be like? What should be in the next G? And there's a couple of regulators, Ofcom and ARCEP, UK and France. There's an operator, Docomo, Takahiro Nakamura, who's very well known in these sorts of events. A fella from Etsy, Anita from NGMN.
It's a good lineup.
Just decent panel, and it's like, what is the next G going to be about? And that's what we're talking about.
Right. So why don't you preempt the findings of that panel and tell us?
Well, there's definitely a mood afoot, feeling afoot, as you would probably paraphrasing you now, that,
Feel free.
G's have got a little bit out of control. There's, why do we need them? They're way over specifying things. They're too complicated. They're too involved.
I think we might have had this debate on the pod with you in the past,
only
haven't we?
20, no doubt. Yeah, it's a sort of perennial, really.
It is a bit, yeah.
And why should we go and spend loads more money on 6G when we've only just spent 5G and so forth? So I think that's the sort of prevailing mainstream view, really. You are mainstream.
I like to think so.
On that front.
Well, I mean,
but it's not the only story. There is more to it.
Yeah. Well, so to summarise that, as I've been paraphrased, I might as well give you my primary quote on the matter. Yeah, 5G. We're like halfway through the perceived 5G cycle, and we know that just because we've got this roughly 10-year cadence, that doesn't mean that the previous Gs don't still keep evolving. But that hasn't really come to that much, certainly commercially. So it's hard to get excited about the next one. And then the only other pushback I have about the Gs is just whether they're helpful as a concept. I know marketing people find it helpful because they hope it's going to create an upgrade cycle and a new sort of rush of general interest. But, if you try to speak to a proper normie, like you called me mainstream, but let's say a normie who doesn't spend every day obsessing about the telecoms industry, ask them to articulate what the point of 5G is and what it means to them as a consumer, I think they'd struggle. So I think that's another reason why. But that's just to clarify my position on the matter. But what is the point of it then?
I mean, I think like the G cycle is 10 years is maybe as when it started, mobile thing for starters was very new and it was a fast-moving industry, so it made sense to have that sort of a cadence.
Yeah.
Whether it really makes sense now to change everything every 10 years, obviously not, because it's much more.
And the cadence was only established about 20 years ago. I don't think we have to be stuck with it.
It's not scripture, is it?
Yeah, totally.
But it's sort of taken on, elements of scripture in certain parts of the industry. So, having said that, most people are like, we're not doing this again, surely, so soon, are we?
Yeah.
However, one thing, and I always used to, I don't know if you remember a fellow called Adrian Scrace, formerly the CTO of Etsy.
That rings a bell. Yeah.
So he's very well known. I would ask him about this. This has been going on for years. And he said, well, yeah, I'll paraphrase him now. He said, one thing you need to be careful of, though, is we have at this point, one thing the cycle does is bring an enormous amount of R&D investment and intellectual investment and capital to your industry, to our industry. And so actually having a process and a system that will corral that and focus it and bring it through is very valuable. So you want to be careful what you wish for a little bit.
Yes.
There's tremendous value in having all these researchers, companies, vendors, operators thinking about how to make things better,
the mind.
what comes next.
Yeah.
And so that is a super valuable part of the structure that you want to be very careful not to screw up.
Yes, well, I concede that point.
And then the other, I think, interesting area is related. This G cycle, if you can put it that way, is carrying a lot of weight that actually isn't probably directly relevant for operators and how they monetize in their planning horizon. But a lot of that weight is funding and sustaining and directing and motivating researchers and R&D businesses and universities and corporate. And so it's not just the funding, it's a vehicle for all this research that in modern society, we need some way to carry that through. So it's almost, you could say, I don't want to use the word tax, but it's carrying weight for something that maybe isn't going to pay off right away. But, further down the road, it's actually supported that research program or stimulated that thread and that process. Yeah. And we need that as well. We can't just be all, driven by the accounts and what's going to be super dead on. We know for sure we need it.
I think that's fair enough.
So,
I think.
Like
Go ahead.
framework for innovation then? Kind of framework
and a catalyst.
What can be done?
Yeah. And where else does that happen in society? There's obviously other industries have similar types of programs, but it's kind of baked into the system, and there's pros and cons. So it's a little bit, don't change everything, just kind of maybe rebalance it a bit.
I agree with that, and from a journalist point of view, I think the biggest negatives that come from these Gs are over-exuberant marketers who not only jump the gun, like, the Americans are often guilty of this, where they'll start marketing the next G when their technology doesn't remotely justify it. I think this most recent, in this last one, it was AT&T went with something that they were broadly calling 5G, and it was nowhere near. And then the other thing that marketers do wrong, as is their nature, is to overhype it and overpromise. And that's an issue. And I think the way Gabe describes it is accurate and constructive, and I think a useful way of encapsulating it. But it's not very helpful for marketers. It's a bit vague and it's a little bit convoluted. So this is the problem: is reconciling the reality of this slow, incremental, and perhaps not necessarily at each stage very exciting innovation, with the need for marketers to go ta-da.
Yeah, I'm going to go in 5 minutes, but
Sure.
Just the fella from Orange, Mikhail Trabia, who spoke
Yeah.
in his one-to-one interview, I think he made a couple of good points on that when Inderpreet was asking him, what's your decision matrix, or how do you decide on things? And he was going, well, yeah, a few years ago we had, should we do 5G, should we do fiber, should we do blockchain? Everyone wants them to do blockchain.
Yeah.
Should we do meta?
A little bit buzzwordy.
And he said a lot of that is what they're kind of wrestling with. There's a lot of buzzwords around. Everyone wants, at the moment, it's that obviously AI, right? I mean, that's this year's sort of.
Certainly is.
No one's going to say anything against it, kind of thing.
No.
And you just get.
Although I did, they had a.
We all get kind of trapped in the industry discussion, don't we? Really, we can blame journalists or marketeers, but it's beyond us all. We get sort of, it's a book, it sucks us all in, and.
Yeah, and
It
there's
sorts
the
out in the end. I mean,
it does. It sorts out, and I guess that comes back to the hype cycle, which is another analyst house, Gartner, that came up with that. But it seems to, as a broad framework of describing things that get overhyped, and then the hype drops off, and then you get a little bit down the line a more realistic development of it. So I guess we've always got to work out when these things are. Well, look, mate, I'll let you shoot off and do your analyst stuff. Thanks a lot for your time. Great chatting to you as ever. I'll finish off by chatting to Teresa. That's a handy thing of us not having clip-on mics, isn't it? You can just skedaddle.
thank you. Yeah.
And,
See you later, Teresa.
and if I don't see you again, I hope your panel goes well. I look forward to hearing about it.
Birthday.
Maybe you'll come on the pod and tell us about it.
See you later.
Cheers. So yeah, I was just going to, with that, I think we've definitely done the API thing. So I was grateful for the opportunity to, because they didn't really speak about anything else this morning. I wasn't I'm sure to talk about, but I was grateful that Gabe had that panel that we could talk about. So then we've got that the next G thing. So again, positioning you as someone who more recently has had to sort of get their head around telecom stuff, which I think is an interesting thing because it means that your learning curve has been steeper than those of us who've been sort of saturated in it for a long time. Yeah, and also with you, just as a consumer, as an end user, what do you think about the Gs? What does 5G mean much to you both as an end user and as a telecoms journalist?
I mean, as an end user, I think one of the things that I've just been thinking about as we were having the chat again about Killer App is I think because you have 3G and 4G, which kind of brought about so much kind of cool stuff on your phone that you didn't have before. You could have like maps on your phone, and there were like any number of apps that were, that were new and exciting. And I feel like with 5G that just didn't really happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't really like,
It was a bit meh.
I'm happy I have 5G because otherwise I couldn't do this. It's a bit faster, it's nice, it's been, I like it, from a customer point of view, but it hasn't really been quite as big of a transformation as some of the previous ones.
No, I think that.
Yeah,
I think everyone's got to concede that.
Not really saying anything new, but
No, but it's each anecdotal experience of it. I can generalise from my point of view, but then just talking to someone else, their experience could be very different from my generalisation. So it's good to know. But yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that's your personal experience.
I feel like it's made. Yeah, I feel like kind of points to maybe like it used to be kind of maybe like a useful marketing thing of like, look, this is new, and you might want to upgrade your subscription, or you might want to take up a subscription. But I think it's become largely irrelevant to the end user.
Yeah, and no one's felt inclined to pay a premium for it.
Like, where has it actually happened? Like, because initially I think
Very few people are charging more for it.
Yeah, there was school of thinking that you would charge more for it, but I think in India now operators have started doing that.
Maybe.
And it's a huge market, obviously, but I think in Europe it's quite rare.
And then what about the incoming messaging you hear about, like the evolution of 5G, maybe 5G standalone, and then 6G? Do you get many people sort of trying to pitch 6G to you already?
I've definitely seen a few panels. I'm not sure if I've done any interviews per se about 6G. I think I might not have. I think I went to a 6G summit not that long ago.
Right.
But I think...
Do you have any sense of what the point of it is? No.
I think...
That's not a trick question.
Yeah, well, I feel like there are the tech specs, and there have been some stuff around kind of possibly using it for sensing, which I thought was
Yes.
interesting. Because that's not something you could have done with any of the previous Gs, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. That framework to do with sensing is one of the big
So
pictures.
that's kind of one of the really interesting things. But I think, yeah, it kind of seems like there's this push and pull where the operators kind of, their messaging seems to be please God, let's just not have it be expensive.
Another upgrade cycle, yeah.
And then you have the vendors being like, but look at this, would you maybe want to spend a bit more money, on X, Y, Z, which is their role, obviously. So
Yeah.
there just seems to be this dance at the minute, but...
Yeah, I mean, we're still probably 5 years plus away from the first manifestations of it in the wild.
Yeah.
But I'm at this stage really struggling to get excited about it and even imagine what it's going to be.
Then maybe, I think that's also not a trick question, but if you think back to 5 years before 5G was introduced, would you have had an idea of what it would be?
No. I mean, I remember, this is going back to about, 2017 or something, writing about the 5G triangle. So this is sort of just a way of conceptualizing the key pillars of 5G. One was what they called enhanced mobile broadband, which to normal people just means faster mobile broadband. Just better wireless data connectivity. One was I think they call it massive machine type communication, which basically means IoT. But that wasn't unique to 5G. We've been talking about IoT for ages. I mean, a lot of IoT connections use 2G.
Yeah, but you have, I think, some that don't really rely on mobile communications, if I'm right in saying that, or like LoRaWAN and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that is another wireless technology, but it's just not part of the 5G, 4G spec. Yeah, you got LoRa, and then you've got other little variations like we used to talk about NB-IoT, which is narrowband IoT, but I think that is part of the 3GPP spec. You've got something called RedCap right now, but the point is, you're right. It's not unique to 3GPP and it's been around for ages. So I always thought it was a bit tenuous, then making that one of the 3 points of the triangle. And then the only one that seemed really innovative to me, or really new or novel, was the third point of the triangle, which was ultra low latency. And you sort of think, latency, all right, what's that mean? It basically means the amount of time it takes for a signal to get from point A to point B. And it's not a pain point for consumers. It's not like when you're chatting to someone on the phone, there's like a 1 second lag. If whatever latency there is, not that hardly anyone ever makes fucking phone calls anymore. So I guess it's even less. But let's say you and I were actually calling each other, we would tolerate a bit of lag. I mean, perhaps up to a second, perhaps up to half a second, something like that. So that doesn't seem like a pain point there. But what it does open up is all sorts of real-time applications, like, for example, autonomous driving, where you've got to have sensors connected to the internet, just constantly sensing and reacting immediately. That's where latency is a really big deal. Another one is remote control. Things like if you're going to use 5G to control drones up in the air, you don't want to have a lag there, or they could crash into each other or into some hapless passerby. So that was the only one that really jumped at me. But again, as we were chatting about earlier, one of the reasons 5G hasn't really taken off is because these low latency use cases haven't really taken off.
Yeah, also with autonomous driving, you would need to have 5G in every road where that autonomous car would go.
Yeah, so there isn't the coverage,
perfect.
that's for sure. Yeah.
Which with 5G, which famously you need a dense network.
Well, and that's where, that's another thing. People like Ericsson, people who sell the kit, would love to big up that use case, because that means you've got to buy a zillion small cells and scatter them everywhere, which means party time for Ericsson people. Extra. Oh God, I've forgotten. I was going to talk about that really alcoholic aquavit. An extra aquavit for everyone. Have you not heard of that? It's like a Swedish fire water. It's properly Scandi booze. They don't muck around like that. But anyway, so they would love to see that, but that would be enormously expensive. And as I think you were alluding to, we certainly don't have that level of coverage now. So it doesn't get there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, unless you've got any last thoughts on that, I won't labour it. We've all got stuff to do this afternoon, and we're on site. It's great to have you on. Hopefully this will be the first of many. You're quite often in the office when we record the pod, so we just have to get into the schedule. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did. Thanks for having me.
Cool. And thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.